On today's edition of the show, the Florida Panthers go into Toronto after upsetting the Boston Bruins and immediately go into Toronto and pick up a win on the road to take home ice advantage away from the Toronto Maple Leafs.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, May 3rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. You could also follow the show account on Instagram as well at LO_FLA Panthers. And thank you for the everydayers who come here every single day to get your daily Florida Panthers fix. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $20 off your first purchase. So the Florida Panthers, they go into Toronto. Very short turnaround, like we spoke about on the crossover episode with Mike DiStefano and David Morsuti of Locked On Leafs. Man, and great for the Florida Panthers that they had that opportunity to get their momentum going from one series to another. Not a lot of rest, get the good feelings going still, and to pick up a 4-2 win over the Toronto Maple Leafs and their first Game 1 win since 1997 over the New York Rangers. And on today's show, it happens to be a Wednesday, which means it is a Winans Wednesday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, a live edition of the show on YouTube. Jacob, welcome to a victorious Winans Wednesday, my friend.
Oh, man, it is night and day from what we were talking about last time when we were grasping at straws, looking for some kind of hope to pull for the Panthers series against Boston. Little did we know that they were going to pull off a miraculous comeback and a huge upset. And here we are now talking about a Game 1 win, which they haven't done in my lifetime. I was born in 2000. This is the first time they've ever won a Game 1 in a playoff series since I've been on this earth. So it's a good night. And we've already there's a lot to be happy about. There's a lot to break down about that game. There's a lot of chatter about how we've already surpassed last year's team and in postseason success. And there's a lot of good feelings, but there's also a lot of work still to do and a lot of stuff we can talk about going forward for the rest of this series, because I do think it'll be a long one.
Yes, no doubt. It'll definitely be a long one for the Florida Panthers and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I was 3 going on 4 when the Florida Panthers won Game 1 against the New York Rangers. Mark Messier, Wayne Gretzky, and former Florida Panthers assistant coach Ulf Samuelsson was on that New York Rangers team, where the Florida Panthers won Game 1 and then ended up losing that series in five games to the Broadway Blue Shirts. But this was a game going into this one where a little bit of a maybe gamesmanship for the Florida Panthers, where Alex Lyon was in the starter's crease in morning skate, and also with on the Toronto Maple Leafs side of things, Ilya Samsonov getting a little bit of a stinger up high in warmups and down on the ice a little bit before the game, but he ends up playing. The Florida Panthers, this was a game where in the beginning you smelled the Florida Panthers really smelled trouble, where they went to the box twice in the first 5 minutes. Puck movement for the Toronto Maple Leafs was great in this one. They had quite a few chances. There was a great breakup pass that the great breakup shot attempt that Barkov had on Matthew Nyes right in the low slot too. But man, the Panthers survived those first 2 penalty kills, and we spoke about how the Panthers needed to stating an obvious here, Jacob, not perform anywhere close to their 59% PK rate that they were in round one. And with that survival, a few minutes later, the Florida Panthers on their first goal, Nick Cousins gets it deep to download. Chucky gets it to the point. Montour misses a net. Mark Stahl on a pinch to get it back to the trapezoid. Bennett to Tkachuk, a shot, and then Nick Cousins on the backhand to make it 1-0 as well. And the physicality as well for the Florida Panthers. The Tkachuk 6 hits in the first period and 9 on the game, which is a career high for Matthew Tkachuk. We knew that we needed to see Matthew Tkachuk take over this team. We saw it in round one, and it continued in round two.
Yeah, what I saw in that first period, the Panthers came out a little bit flat-footed defensively, which to be expected, given that they just finished a high-intensity series, probably very draining. It took them a few minutes to get their legs under them, but I think what Paul Maurice mentioned mid-game in his comments to Dominic Moore was that penalty kill had not been good. It was really, really bad against Boston, and the Maple Leafs come in with a potent power play, and the Panthers, they got 2 really, really big penalty kills where their penalty kill didn't necessarily look sharp. They gave up a few opportunities, but they had some timely blocks, some timely clears, and Sergei Bobrovsky was the best penalty killer on the team. Again, as is often necessary from your goalie. And I think those 2 penalty kills really gave them a lot of confidence. It seemed to give them a boost, and it swung momentum. Getting the first goal on the road is always huge, especially in an atmosphere like the Maple Leafs have. That is a really rowdy and loud home crowd, and he took them completely out of it. I thought they played a great road game. You kill a couple of those penalties, you play more discipline going forward. And then, as we saw against Boston, and then again, it carried over this game, very, very few teams, very, very few lines can hang with the Panthers at 5-on-5. When it gets to 5-on-5 hockey, the Panthers forecheck really wears teams down. That second line has cycled the puck well. The top line is starting to cycle the puck well, and that third line has had a lot of juice in the last few games. So I feel like the forecheck at 5-on-5, the physicality, the Panthers can grind teams away and really, really lean into the opposing team's defense. As long as they're playing at 5-on-5, which is where the Panthers really took control of this game, had a really strong, tight stranglehold of the grip on this one once they got to even strength.
Yeah, and even though the Toronto Maple Leafs outshot the Panthers in the game 36-28, 5-on-5, the Florida Panthers were the one to actually outshoot the Toronto Maple Leafs 23-20 on the game. And you talk about that third line. There's a few opportunities that they had where Sam Reinhart really put the moves on the Leafs defense, and Samsonov was there sharp early. A great save that he had on Anton Lundell really early on. He was keeping it from being a 1-0 game, and he kept it closer than it was supposed to be. And also for the Florida Panthers, what they had in common here was both in the second and third period, going into those periods, they had leads. They also scored first, where they're 5-0 in the playoffs right now when they score first. So that's a bonus for the Florida Panthers here. And also for the Panthers, I mean, yeah, they went up 2-0 and they gave up the lead. They gave up the lead 9 seconds later. I mean, Matthew Knies gets a deflection that ends up redirected off Sam Bennett. What a way for Aaron Ekblad to get his first point of the series. I mean, Aaron Ekblad hasn't played poorly, even though he missed Game 4 of the Boston series. He hasn't played poorly, but this is his first point, and a big first point in the playoffs. He's a +7, Jacob, in the playoffs right now. Aaron Ekblad. I know plus minus isn't the end all be all, but Aaron Ekblad, we haven't had much to complain about him. Yeah, he did get a little crossed up along with Sam Bennett on that Matthew Knies goal, which was a beautiful spinorama attempt as well. And of course, we knew that 2-0 wasn't going to be a safe lead. I mean, it was 2-2 at one point. And Ryan O'Reilly with a give and go to Kyle Yarncrook. Gudis trying to create a hit on Ryan O'Reilly, and then there's a feed to Michael Bunting where he goes backhand forehand on Sergei Bobrovsky. None of the goals were Sergei Bobrovsky's fault on the night, but also how the Florida Panthers. This is a game where we can't criticize Alexander Barkov. 70% from the faceoff circle, and he was a big reason why that third goal happened. Where on a breakout, 3 Toronto Maple Leafs players were looking at Anthony Duclair. Everyone's backs were towards Carter Verhaeghe, and then he goes on the breakaway, going all the way down to beat Samsonov to make it 3-2. And again, going into periods with leads, that is crucial, and 100% on the PK as well. Just an overall great game for this Florida Panthers team, and for me, once that Verhaeghe goal scored, which now is a postseason record for the Panthers, it kind of gave me that feeling that the Panthers were gonna win this.
I agree with you on that. A lot to unpack there. What I want to focus on from what you said is definitely give some credit to Ekblad and Barkov. Ekblad, his point production hasn't shown it in the playoffs because Brandon Montour has really taken on the offensive defenseman role, which is fantastic for him. But Ekblad has been a true professional. He hasn't complained once about moving off of that top power play unit where he thrived last year. He gets out there, he does his job. He's accepted a role as the top shutdown defenseman. He chips in offensively for sure, but he doesn't have to carry the point production load from the blue line, and he's really embraced being a shutdown defenseman, which he was against Boston. Plus minus is not the biggest stat that we should look to. It's somewhat outdated, but in a playoff series, that is a stat that carries a little more weight than in regular season. And to be a plus minus against the Boston Bruins, that's huge. And to come out and play the way he did tonight, I thought he was excellent. He had a really active stick, broke up a lot of plays in the neutral zone. The Panthers dominated the neutral zone for long stretches of this game where the Maple Leafs couldn't even break out clean, which was really where the Panthers were able to take control. And then Sasha Barkov was fantastic, really neutralized Auston Matthews for most of the game. Had a couple of shifts against John Tavares and made him look invisible. And I think the Panthers where this series is going to be won or lost is going to be up the middle with the centers. And on paper, the Maple Leafs probably have the advantage with Matthews, Tavares, and O'Reilly. But tonight it was Barkov, it was Bennett, and it was Anton Lundell who those our 3 centers outclassed the Maple Leafs three centers in this game. And that's really all the difference. I think we match up well. I think that kind of style of play, the hard forecheck, the outgrinding a team that has a ton of skill. I feel like it's a recipe for success. And this, I know we've been critical of Paul Maurice all year, and rightfully so in many cases, but you have to give credit where it's due. This is that kind of playoff style that he was talking about early on, learning how to play this playoff style. They clamped down in that third period. They didn't let the Leafs back in it. They got a timely goal to put it away, and it was shut down defense from there. This is what was talked about, and we have to give credit where it's due.
Yeah, no doubt, big credit. And you think about the centers outplaying these centers from the Toronto Maple Leafs, 2 number 1 overall picks in Matthews and Tavares, which Matthews and Matthew Tkachuk were in the same draft too. So also something of note. And Matthew Tkachuk and Mitch Marner were teammates in the OHL back in 2017. So a little bit of a storyline there for Matthew Tkachuk and Mitch Marner, along with Auston Matthews. And once again, great play from the centers, and of course the Florida Panthers containing the guys from the Toronto Maple Leafs. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2. We're going to discuss more about the Florida Panthers and some of the key stats from tonight's game as the Florida Panthers go into Toronto and win by a final score of 4-2 in hockey's Mecca. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Game Time, and buying your tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easiest way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater near you, with killer deals, the last-minute tickets, and best price guarantee. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals to tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive deals, tickets for football, basketball, hockey, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Download the Game Time app and create an account. Use code LOCKEDONAHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONAHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Segment number 2 here on this Wednesday, May 3rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And everydayers, on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, we'll be bringing in Steel Roden of Locked On Fantasy Hockey to discuss and preview more of Game 2 of the Florida Panthers versus the Toronto Maple Leafs on Thursday. And listen, Jacob, also another person who had a great game for the Florida Panthers, Mark Stahl, which he had that pinch that resulted in getting the puck down in the end boards, but also when Brandon Montour scored on that delayed penalty, he had a great screen up front, which Matthew Tkachuk, I wasn't sure whether he was cross-checked or interfered by Jake McCabe in the Panthers zone, and then the Panthers had so much offensive zone time and work cycling the puck, and then Brandon Montour with a rocket of a shot, 6 goals in 8 playoff games for Brandon Montour, and every single goal scorer, Jacob, was from the province of Ontario on the night, which is an incredible which was incredible thing that was pointed out by Alex Baumgartner of 5 Reasons Sports, and great game by Mark Stahl. And for the Panthers, Mitch Marner only had 1 shot on goal. And even though Auston Matthews had 6 shots on goal, I really didn't feel that Auston Matthews was so much of a threat tonight. William Nylander, Sergei Bobrovsky is going to live in his nightmares tonight. He was consistently wreaking havoc on the night. Same thing with John Tavares, especially towards the end of the game where Sam Bennett was sent to the box on that double minor. And multiple times John Tavares had 2 opportunities up front, and Bob was quick to freeze the puck. And also on a wraparound that Barkov, it almost deflected off of Barkov's skate and in too. But the Panthers were able to stop the superstars, which Mitch Marner is nominated for the Selke Trophy this year as well. But the Panthers, they found a way to contain especially those 2. What did you see about what the Panthers did to contain the superstars of the Maple Leafs?
Yeah, I felt like those guys are gonna get their chances. They're superstar players. They know how to create offense. They're gonna get some chances. Auston Matthews had a couple of really good opportunities. He came up the center of the ice on one opportunity after picking up a new stick from the bench. Bobrovsky got the best of him. He had another chance where Bobrovsky poke checked him at the last second, and Marner had a couple of chances where he went for some shot passes and some things like that. But I felt like the Panthers did a really good job of not giving them any time and space. Whenever one of those guys got the puck, someone was right in their face, playing hard defense. And a lot of times it was a guy like Barkov, a guy like Tkachuk, a guy like Bennett, guys who are superstar players in their own right, but they were right there to do the dirty work on defense, which I think goes a long way. And that's what you talk about when you talk about a two-way player. I also felt like Bobrovsky, he made some really timely saves. He made some really big saves at big times. That goes a long way as well. It's demoralizing when a star player feels like they've got a golden opportunity and they get robbed by a goalie. I want to say Bob had 3.5 goals saved above expected tonight, or something along those lines. I'm not a huge advanced stats kind of truther, but the eye test definitely backs that up. He made a lot of saves that most goalies are not making, which you don't really know if that's sustainable or if it's not, but they got it tonight, and the Stars were neutralized through a combination of good team defense and really timely goaltending. And I love the point you brought up about our goal scorers being from Ontario. I think that's a really funny point, at which, a lot of guys in the NHL are from Ontario, grew up loving the Maple Leafs, but it's got to feel extra sweet scoring in your hometown against the team you grew up cheering for. But another thing that not a ton of people are even aware of is the fact that Carter Verhaeghe is actually a Toronto Maple Leafs draft pick.
Mm-hmm.
The Maple Leafs drafted Verhaeghe, and they gave up on him before he ever even played a game. Ended up trading him in a deal, I believe, for Michael Grabner, if I'm not mistaken. May have been Michael Grabner. I'm not entirely sure who it was, but they traded him before he ever got a shot to prove himself in Toronto. And that's for a guy like Verhaeghe, grew up wanting to be a Toronto Maple Leaf, got drafted by them. They give up on him, and now he punishes them in their own home building. That's a really cool storyline to me. I think Verhaeghe's a perfect example of a guy who has been an underdog his entire career. Now he's playing on the ultimate underdog right now in the playoffs, and he is shining with another game-winning goal.
Yeah, and I don't know what the shooting percentage is on the top of my head. I'm gonna research that for tomorrow's show. So gonna make a note of that. But Carter Verhaeghe, definitely the best shooter that the Florida Panthers have as far as willingness to snipe the puck, and just how Maple Leafs draft pick, and then playing that role with a not big role, with the Tampa Bay Lightning, and them letting them go, and then the Florida Panthers just using that to their advantage as well. And man, aren't we glad to see Carter Verhaeghe in a Florida Panthers uniform? And one more thing about going back to your Sergei Bobrovsky point, 9 for 9 in saves on the PK, and just incredible that it like I mentioned earlier, the first 2 PKs, and Paul Maurice even said it, that they're going to they've accepted the fact that they're going to be going to the box more often than their opponents. So it's and that's something that I've started also to just accept as far as this version of the Florida Panthers. But hey, we're not complaining. It's a win. It's a road win as well. And honestly, with the way road teams are playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs, I think we should call it road ice advantage instead of the other way around. Because of the Florida Panthers 4-1 on the road versus 1-2 at home for those keeping score when it comes to that. So the momentum for the Panthers carrying on, and the Florida Panthers setting that tone early for this series. And like we said, it's going to be a long series still, so we can't expect Matthews and Marner to be contained for long. So we just gotta continue that this carries on to the rest of the series. But in segment number 3, we're going to discuss more about preparing for game 2, and we are going to discuss the schedule release for the rest of the series. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Wednesday, May 3rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where the Florida Panthers are coming off a 4-2 road win over the Toronto Maple Leafs. And it's funny because I had a lot of people at me today about my pick for this series, and I said Leafs in 6, and people are like, I can't believe you didn't pick the Panthers. But what if I told you that it might have been by design, so I don't get disappointed, and when they do win, when they do, that it just feels so much sweeter. And when you lower your expectations, the victory feels so much sweeter. And look what happened in the previous series. I couldn't be happier to be wrong, and I wouldn't be happier to be wrong in this one. But of course, it's one game. There's still 6 games max left in this series. And Jacob, the schedule was released 2 hours before puck drop. Surprised that we saw the schedule as late as they did. You would think that with one Game 7 on Monday night, you would think that the NHL would have so many different contingency plans for if the Devils had won versus if the New York Rangers had won. And the NHL didn't have to worry about booking Madison Square Garden because of the Knicks being in the postseason as well, which, by the way, the Heat have nothing to hang their hat on. With barely losing against the New York Knicks without Jimmy Butler, they should feel confident going into Saturday. By the way, that's my quick take on the Heat series. Which go to listen to Locked On Heat with David Ramil and Wes Goldberg as they break down that game. But the rest of the schedule for the Florida Panthers, we knew that Thursday that Game 2 would be on Thursday, 7 p.m. on TNT. But the rest of the series, 2 days of rest. Sunday, game 3 in Sunrise, Florida, 6:30 on TBS. Game 4, another 2 days off, where the Florida Panthers will be at home against the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's on ESPN. And then Game 5 is on Friday, May 12th. Game 6 Sunday in Florida, and then Game 7 would be on a Tuesday, which means if there's a Game 7, that means we would have a Winans Wednesday, by the way, if that were to happen, and that would be on TNT. So also, the home games don't conflict with the Miami Heat neither. So very, very great situation that the Florida Panthers did, and that was a request. But the NHL also messed up, and I said this in our chat. They messed up by scheduling Game 2 of Edmonton, Vegas on Friday, and then changed it. They announced it publicly and then changed it to Saturday. Oh, big mess up by the NHL. But I think that also has to do with the fact that the Florida Panthers really wanted to request that game not on Saturday, to not conflict with the Heat, even though their game on Saturday is a 3:30 game. But the Panthers, what's the great thing about this, Jacob? The fact that who they're playing. We know that with the Toronto Maple Leafs, they're not going to put the Toronto Maple Leafs in an afternoon slot on a weekend. They're going to put them in the prime time slot. When in round 1, they were putting the Maple Leafs and the Rangers at the same time in prime time. And the world is going to see the Florida Panthers, which is beautiful.
I agree. And I want to point out that the Panthers-Bruins series was the most watched series in the first round of any series in the NHL. That number came out just a little bit ago, earlier tonight. But a couple things that I really, really love about the scheduling. One, last year was so painful, and it actually literally had an impact on the team's success in that second round against the Tampa Bay Lightning, when the scheduling conflicted with the Miami Heat, and you could literally see the difference in the crowd between the second round against the Lightning and the first round against the Capitals. It was a combination of a 30-minute earlier than the first round puck drop, and the crowd was having to pick Heat or Panthers. We're not going to have that problem this year, and I think that was intentionally done by the NHL, which I do really appreciate from the league by making sure that that's the case. On a personal note, I'm a big basketball guy. We went to the Heat versus Magic game here in Miami North in Orlando earlier this year, and it's really nice for us to get to enjoy both of our teams in their playoff runs right now. I see a couple of the comments about the Heat and Knicks. Scott Foster disaster class tonight. Terrible officiating to end that game, but it's all right. We're winning that series in 5. But I think scheduling wise, this works out for the Panthers for a number of reasons. One, primetime television. That's huge. That's really big. And being the underdog, I feel like most of the hockey world is rooting for the Panthers to upset the Toronto Maple Leafs, because the Maple Leafs are not a very well-liked team outside of Toronto. So that's one thing. Panthers are going to pick up a lot of fans through this run. And then another thing that really helps them is the fact that I think it sets up a really, really good situation for them as far as rest, recovery. I feel like right now they're in such a groove on the road. You want that next road game to come sooner rather than later, which is great. That's what's going to happen. They're going to have one day off, and then they're going to have that game 2 on the road where they've been playing really well away from home. And then you get to come home, and then the rest happens at home, which is big. Having that extra day off at home versus having that extra day off on the road, it's beneficial to the home team. That's a travel day for Toronto, and they're coming to an area where it's not the same as resting at home or with your family or whatever the case may be. So I think the Panthers having that extra rest take place at home is really beneficial. The Panthers have been dominant at home a lot of the time, not so much in the playoffs recently, but the way they've been playing on the road, if you smell blood in the water and you end up stealing another game in Toronto, you can come home and really put your foot down on this team. So I think the Panthers are set up in a really great situation as far as the scheduling is concerned. And then if you take care of business on the road, you somehow come out of Toronto with 2 wins. The original mission's already accomplished. You took home ice back. You won a game in Toronto, which is always the gold standard of how you have to approach a series, at least steal 1 on the road. But if you can get 2, this is a whole different story. And I think the Panthers are set up very nicely for that.
Yeah, the funniest thing, and thankfully I happened to refresh my Instagram for Bleacher Report, which they pointed out from the previous series against the Toronto Maple Leafs, 2 fans going in there with Tampa Bay Lightning jerseys, and those same fans going to the game in Florida Panthers apparel as well. Just tell me you hate the Leafs without telling me you hate the Leafs in that situation.
Those same fans. There were also photos of them wearing Coyotes jerseys earlier in the year. I did not know that. Yep, I saw it just before we went on Twitter. Those fans have been at Leafs games all year wearing whatever the opponent is. They're wearing the opponent's jersey. It's hilarious.
That's amazing. And yeah, going back to the Miami North comment when you and I went to go see the Heat against the Magic earlier, but let's relate that to the Panthers and Leafs as far as the away fans as well. The Panthers and the Viola family, Matthew Caldwell, restricting addresses from Canada to buy tickets, and then apparently, according to George Richards, that was lifted based on the zip code. But there's a lot of Leaf fans in the U.S. as well, so I think it's still going to be a good amount of blue in the crowd. Of course, we saw. I went to Game 4 and 6 of the Boston series, and there was a lot of black and gold. But listen, I didn't think that really intimidated the Panthers too. That was still a very, very loud arena for the 2 games that I went to, the 2 home games that I went to there. So I'm very, very looking forward to when the Florida Panthers do return home. And listen, it's only going to get better. It's only going to get better if they do in fact get a win on the road, because because there might be Leaf fans that might think about purchasing a ticket, and if they go down 0-2, it might change their mind about purchasing a ticket, and we might not see as much of a sea of blue as anticipated. So that's why I'm hoping, more importantly, that the Florida Panthers do in fact go up 2-0 against the Toronto Maple Leafs on the road, so that we don't see that sea of blue at FLA Live Arena, because it's very telling. Based on, you couldn't tell in the Tampa series as much because their colors match, but you could possibly tell in this upcoming. We'll know definitely for sure on Sunday. That's for sure. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Winans Wednesday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We are celebrating a victory tonight, and hopefully another victory on Thursday night. So thank you once again for joining me. Tell everybody where they can follow you online.
Definitely. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Winans 8. I'm always here on Wednesdays. I appreciate everyone in the comments and everyone watching, both live and when this is up tomorrow. But yes, like Armando said, the arena, there's definitely going to be at least a good amount of Leafs fans. So please, if you can, pack that building, make it an incredible environment, and buckle up. This should be a good series.
Oh, it's definitely going to be a fun one, Jacob. And thank you so much. And I will see you next week, my friend.
Looking forward to it. Thanks.
And if you like what you're hearing, Please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for everydayers, make sure to come back tomorrow on Thursday's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We'll be bringing in Stu Roden of Locked On Fantasy Hockey to preview Game 2 of the Florida Panthers versus Toronto Maple Leafs matchup. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.